if you have a large horse, so a cold-blooded horse or a heavy horse or a Clydie or something like that, it's one thing to train it, but it's also another level because it's such a big thing to move around. And if they're heavy and they're lugging on the lead, this podcast is going to give you a few tips.
Hello, welcome to Mark Langley's Horsemanship Podcast, a podcast helping people to understand their horses better, to provide solutions in a calm, connected way.
I'm Jenny Langley.
And I'm Mark Langley.
So, Mark, large, cold-blooded horses, heavy horses perhaps, are they different from other horses and how you got to train them?
It depends on the background and breeds, because you get the some of the warm bloods that come from different lineage and they can have a bit more hot blood in them, and you know, you get some of the warm bloods who can be very stoic and strong, just like you know, some of the colder breeds and some of the gypsy type breeds that you get, you know, and then you get Clydesdales, and some people get Clydesdales because they're very, you know, beautiful animals, and but in the sense of you know, big heavy horses and cold bloods, the Clydesdales can be very sensitive horses, and I get a lot of Clydesdales that have been damaged by pressure and are quite emotional. So they're almost like, I don't want to sort of link the two too strongly, but they're almost like the Arab of the heavy horses, because they're actually sometimes don't have a lot of confidence, and then you get another horse that just hunkers down and, you know, seems to have a lot of confidence, but they just kind of zone out and have strong thoughts, and they're all a bit different. But I guess the cold bloods can have an ability to hang on to a thought sometimes longer than another horse can.
Yeah, because in the old days, weren't the heavy horses used for ploughing, and that was so they needed to have that sort of one-track mindset, I'm going there and nowhere else. So they're a little bit more inflexible because of that purpose? Yeah,
I don't know, and I think some of where they come from initially, so they, you know, over, you know, some of those, I talk about breeds that are up in the, you know, the Baltic country and the highlands and stuff, and there might be ponies, but they kind of got this kind of stoic mindset. And yeah, like if you look at a Clydesdale, you know, they were bred to plough and stuff like that, and I think you put a set of winkers on them and give them a straight line and keep things simple, and everything's pretty good. But when you sort of expose them to the world that we want to put them through, you know, we have to be really careful with their education and make sure it's good education, so they can really process all the different things that they've got to think about. And I think once upon a time, a lot of horses, you know, I don't want to put a blanket on the old days, but there was a lot of horses that were just in a semi-shutdown state, just, you know, operating as a workhorse 24/7, and the some of the colder bloods that were more harness horses. Obviously, they're big, strong horses, and they're fairly steady, and their ability to just kind of, you know, well, some of them have a stronger ability to shut down than, say, an Arab. So that can be a coping mechanism, and also it can be actually probably a bad way of saying it, but it's actually probably safer that the horse shuts down than it doesn't shut down, I suppose. But some horses can, you know, just live in their little bubble and just hunker down, and other horses aren't designed to do that, and it's going to be a lot harder for them to be like that. So over the years they've developed, you know, certain frames of horses that are designed to pull, but also I think the mindsets that go with those horses, you know, are obviously better for that job.
What about like the gentleness of it? Because you sort of, I remember seeing pictures of like huge Shire horses and a little tiny kid on them. You know, they are known for their sort of quiet gentleness and non-spooky nature too, aren't they?
Yeah, and they are. There are a lot that are very gentle and non-spooky and very placid. But on the other coin, you know, I see a lot that are on the other side of things that are very anxious. You know, have trouble processing new environments, and when they're out of their comfort zone, they really sort of struggle. And yeah, I'm not sure the exact reason why there's these branches along the lines that are like that. But you can't just buy, like a lot of people buy a heavy horse and think, oh, I've got this big, quiet puppy dog, and yeah, in all cases they are. But with the wrong training, any one of those horses can be a time bomb waiting to go off. So, we don't just think, that breed, we can do what we want with it and expose it to anything, because some of the most troubled horses I have at clinics were the big, quiet sort of breed, like Gypsy Cobs. Like I've had, say 3 occasions more, but 3 that I can sort of, think about right now of Gypsy Cobs that have just been very, very quiet and suddenly bolted, suddenly tried to jump through float windows, because they've just been, overexposed, undereducated, held on to the anxiety, hunkered down, shut down, and then suddenly pop, they explode. And I believe they were taken for granted because of their genetics, and that's one thing we really have to be careful we don't do, is just buy a breed and because of the genetic, take it for granted and think we can do what we want with it.
So you mentioned heavy and anxious horses there. We're going to come to those in a moment, especially the anxious side of it. But I've got a question here from Nat from Australia, who's got a 17-hand Hanoverian mare, who's she's doing some groundwork with, and she's very heavy to lead. She'll go where she wants to go. She'll march on and leave the human dangling behind. But otherwise, she's soft, willing and calm. So she's given an example where she has walked over her daughter when they were taking a bandage off. She just got worried, turned her head and walked off. But she's not malicious in any way. So Nat would like to know, have you got any tips about sort of getting them to engage with you a bit more so they don't have this heavy marching off, pulling you on the lead scenario? She's wondering, should she work her in the round yard first and then maybe increase the area around them? She just really wants to be able to hold her and lead her when she's caring for her. Yeah,
I'm just going to quickly go into the psychology behind that. I'm taking a punt, as always, just by the scenario that you've sort of mentioned. This morning I did an online lesson, and there's a horse that's only just been started, a little quarter horse, and we did some how do you deal with danger lessons, and she was, the other day we did one, and we sort of got him to sort of do something about his anxiety to a flag, opposed to just stand there. And it was amazing the difference between standing and just going, I don't know what to do, and wanting to run off. And he's a started little quarter horse who's very quiet, or should I say very still, and just kind of doesn't search, doesn't do anything. But then when he builds up enough anxiety, he destinates and targets somewhere else. So, and that's a very common scenario that I come across, as horses that just hunker down, don't think, and then when they do decide they've had enough of that anxiety, they've had a build up or whatever, there's something they don't like that you're doing, then they just target their mind to the last place of safety and drag themselves there. And so basically it's a very common scenario that see horses that don't process their environment very well, don't make lots of decisions, they're kind of compliant, and then when they get too much anxiety, they just go to the last place of safety, and that thought is so strong it's very hard to break.
And they don't really show that anxious nature either, do they? They can just literally just be standing there, and then all of a sudden they're going. But actually in their mind, they're like, I'm out of here. Yeah.
So just, I've had enough. I'm off, and not much you can do to change it. Right. So basically they're very hard to interrupt. But if you get one of those horses, say a small yard, where there's no destination that they can run off to, and no safety, they'll just go very compliant, and you've got to kind of feel like you've got to carry them with pressure all the time, because they just don't search, they don't go towards their thoughts, they're not constantly kind of thinking and analysing the pressure and the opportunity all the time. They're kind of relying on, just about carrying them. So those horses, people might have them a big lunge stick and they might be able to keep lunging them, but whatever they're driving, the horse will keep going. But as soon as they stop driving, the horse will just stop. And then when you ride them in an arena, it's like kick to keep it going and all that. But then as soon as you stop doing it, the horse just stops and hunkers down again. But it's a common scenario. But the biggest thing is their inability to let go of a thought, take on a new thought. And if you watch them, they're not doing that all the time. They're not having all these little mini thought transitions in their mind all the time. They're just going very still, very quiet, and then latching on to a destination and targeting that destination. And in this case, by the sounds of it, the horse is like a tank when it does it. So the biggest thing I think you've got to look into, and it's a tough one because there's so many things. If I had the horse at a clinic, I'd actually be testing the ability to search, and so creating little anxiety and watching really hard to how your horse deals with that anxiety. But the just in a practical side of things, there's something that you can do is in a medium-sized yard. I worked those horses on a long rope, and I had a horse years ago that was a bit like this. It'd take random opportunities. It'd just kind of boom, beeline it and take off, which means it was a horse that was anxiety stacking in some respect. And then at an opportune moment, what the horse thought was an opportune moment, it'd suddenly tap out and go. And pretty well rip the rope out of the owner's hands and even trommel her over it, you know. So what I did with this horse is I've had a few horses on the end of the rope that have been big horses, and I can get on an angle to say put a boundary on them, and I can put a turn on them. And I guess what you don't want to be doing with these horses is being right under their chin, because they're just going to drag and then run off, okay? So when you're leading them, one of the things that you've got to sort of put in place, like there's so many long-term things you can put in place, but there's one thing you can put in place that there is a boundary to running off, so they stop thinking about running off, and then you can get them to search. But you might just be leading along and you just walk on a long rope where the horse thinks it's got space, and then it'll go, oh, beauty, opportunity. And then right at that moment with both hands on the rope, you might step back and pull and say, not available, but then you loosen the rope so the horse kind of turns and faces a little, and then there's no pressure on and you just stand there not like nothing happened. Now, out in a big paddock, the horse might be too strong for you to do that, but in an arena, the desire to really push and run might be maybe 50%, and you might be able to sort of, you know, get a turn on that horse and say, you know, the end of the rope's a boundary. And once they can understand that the end of the rope's a boundary, they'll stop testing that rope. And then when they stop testing the rope, you can start to feel a bit safer that they just won't go, beauty, I'm going to take the opportunity. Because what's happened is it's worked for them, for this horse quite a few times. That's why they do it. So once they say completely leaving's not available, then you can say, okay, we'll search within the boundary that you've got. And then you have to go through a series of, work of how, you know, creating anxiety. So like wave a flag until the horse looks worried, and then what does it do with that worry? Does it just go tap out and destinate, or does it search in the environment that you've given it? And if it knows where the end of the rope is, then it may not just destinate when you create a little anxiety. But what you're looking for when you create a little anxiety is the horse is looking and searching, not just kind of hunkering down and going, I'm not going to do anything then, I'm just going to do the old shut down while they desensitise me sort of thing. It's a tough lesson though, and you know, I could go on for hours about, you know, little things to do, but really that's what I'd be doing with that horse. And then the third part of it is connection. So some people might say connection, you need connection. If the horse is connected to you, it won't run off. And I say, well, that's fine. Of course, a horse more connected that likes us is not going to run off. But in a human environment, not just you and your connection with your horse, but in a human environment, what's causing that horse to build up that anxiety and then run off? It's obviously not processing the information and the pressures around it well enough to make good decisions. So if you just worked on connection, well, you might have a horse that maybe when it's with you not want to run off, but when someone else is leading the horse, or you know, something else is going on, that there's more anxiety with somebody else, then that somebody else doesn't have that same connection. That horse still doesn't process anxiety in its environment or whatever, doesn't like maybe its hind foot being picked up, whatever the problem may be, and then it still takes that opportune moment under pressure to suddenly run off. So you know, connection is still a very good thing that you want to go out and work on. So, you know, but you wouldn't want to be just saying, okay, when you see her looking away, get her to think on you and say, focus on me all the time, because that wouldn't be teaching her to process the problem and search for an answer. It'd just be redirecting a focus to you, and that'd still kind of hobble her, because how are you going to get her to search away then and look away? So basically, if you do have to get her to focus back on you when she thinks away, which is okay to do it, I'm talking about the overdoing it, then you still got to get her to look away again so she can go towards the thoughts and transfer her focus to thinking away and coming back to you and things like that. So I know I'm giving you a lot of answers and ideas to think about, but the biggest thing is don't lead her close to start with and let her find the end of the rope if you can. Give her an opportunity to run off. It's sort of like you bait her a little bit, but you're ready for it and you've got your gloves on and you got to hold her on her, not a bit. You don't want to hurt her mouth. And she gets to the end of the rope and you put all your weight on that halter and say, that's not going to work. And you've got to be side on to it like 90 degrees with that rope. And you'll put a catch on it and then you just soften and say, see, I am Clint Eastwood and you didn't know it. Because it's when you're busy focusing on her, she might run off, but when you're doing something else, she runs off. So you've got to be looking like you're doing something else, but you actually got a high awareness that she's about to run off, and you know when you can pick up that rope. And once she stops testing it, then you can work on those other things, as I said before.
So these heavy horses, if they're sort of they're marching on this direction that they fixate on, it's all anxiety related, but because it's anxiety related, if you can fix that anxiety, you can actually help them.
Yeah, so it's not necessarily about fixing the anxiety. Anxiety is it's the build up of anxiety. Like, when to me, there's a lot of ways I explain it, but one way I'll use right now is a horse is like a filter. And when you've been pumping water through a filter and it's dirty water's got a lot of anxiety in it, okay? So, and then eventually that filter clogs up, and then something's going to blow somewhere when that filter, so whether the motor blows or the pipe blows, okay? So basically, if the horse is a good filter, there's a fair bit of anxiety that can go through the water, through the horse, but you've got to clean the filter out, and it's a horse making decision that lets go of the anxiety. So it's how that is, if that anxiety builds up in the horse and it doesn't feel that it can process those little things that are happening constantly around it, then it builds up and they pop. Whereas if they can do something about that anxiety, that it flows in and flows out. Okay, so basically the anxiety flows in, a horse sees something, it does something about that as it happens, and then it ticks it off that say, I've done something about it, I can let go of it now. And then it's constantly doing that, opposed to everything stacking up until it pops.
Okay, your next question then is similar to what you've just been saying, because it is about anxiety. Em has a Clydesdale mare here in Australia, and she has been trying to sort of work with her and keep her own body language minimum as possible, because she's quite anxious and she anticipates what she's going to ask. So she's seen a lot of improvements in her, but she was riding her recently and her mare got stuck in reverse. So any movement of the reins and she would back up at a fair pace. So she wasn't quite sure how to get her out of that when she gets stuck, because obviously you don't want to get her stuck and forward either. So have you got any suggestions to help with her anxiety and her anticipation and that particular scenario?
Yeah, and I noticed also Em mentioned that she notices her hold her breath and have gulps in her breathing and stuff like that, like real sort of, so this mare sounds like she does carry a lot of tension, and I get the feeling that she's been worked in a certain way that makes her anticipate and worry about pressure and the consequence of pressure, and she's probably more so of a release hunter than a horse that can kind of grasp the idea of feel and follow it. So in regarding the backup and the running away from pressure, is just she's hunting release and she doesn't want to get in trouble for pushing. And it is common in some training and starting that if a horse leans on the reins, they get backed up twice as far than the amount that they leaned, or not twice as far. I mean, they might get back 50 metres and sometimes hustled back. And they get so worried about the bit chasing them backwards that if they get anxious to avoid pushing or making a mistake, they actually run backwards to kind of get them out of trouble. But then, because the anxiety builds up and they don't know what to do, so they run backwards. So that's what I'm guessing happened. I'm not going to say that's exactly what happened, but most of those horses that run backwards, that's a common scenario. So the first thing you got to think about as in even not in the riding and things like that. And you've seen me do it in the long reins and in hand. Is I'll back with a horse, and if they start running backwards, and I'll do it in hand, I'll just keep going with them. Go back to a halter, so it's no nose pressure, not bit pressure for a while, and just catch them up with the pressure and say, you can't run away from me. I'm still with you. There you go. I'm still backing with you, and you just stay with them until they kind of go, oh, I can still feel the pressure, and the pressure's not hunting me. It's, but you've got to give yourself a fair bit of space to do this. And you do that in hand until you can actually control the back up again, and you can feel them in your hand, backing and thinking backwards. She also needs an awareness that's just like I talked about with the last horses, how to search when she's kind of completely frozen and fixated as how to look away from pressure, because I dare say she stares at where the pressure is or thinks about where it's coming from. And that's where, sometimes I put a little bit of a worry up in the air and until the horse blinks and looks away from it. And that's a tricky lesson to do, but I believe it's something that you need to look into, how she sees pressure and what she does with her thoughts. When she sees visual pressure around her, does she just fixate, or does she search and breathe and start to think about her opportunities? So it's giving her an opportunity to do something under pressure, and that'll help her not hold in all that anxiety that causes her to chuff and make funny burping noises and have shallow breathing, because she'll look and process and breathe the air and start to realise that she's empowered to do something, because it sounds like she's kind of frozen, much like someone tied to a chair watching a horror movie, made to watch a horror movie with their eyes kind of, held open, and they hate horror movies. It's like they just kind of end up frozen there, and horses end up in the same sort of, they're basically doing the same thing.
Freeze or flight. So, and under saddle, it's going to be same in that back up as backer. If she starts getting away from you, well, what you can do maybe is just go back step, thank you, back step, and just do a lot of one step back, thank you, one step back, thank you, until she realises she just has to take one step and then take 2 steps and then 3 steps. That's one way into the back up. But if she does start to get ahead of you and start to run backwards, do these lessons in a safe ground, safe environment. And as I say, hang in there a little bit longer, but not pulling on the reins, but just keep a little feel on her till she starts to go, oh, well, back and didn't get away from it. They're still there, oh, righto, and then you feel them lean a bit, and then you say, no, you can back from the pressure, and back with the pressure, not away from the pressure. So yeah, it's just like you catch them up with that pressure, and then you teach them how to back up slowly. So you start very small, like creeping in the back up, increase the back up, and then to slow down, you decrease the back up. Don't just sort of release the reins. That's another, and this is a good one for everybody, is that there's a lot of bracing when we release the reins in horses, because we release and they go, oh, release and stop, and everything just kind of shuts down. So when I'm backing a horse, I'm if I feel that in a lot of horses, I start to back and say back up and then back down, and I walk them down into a stop in their back up. So I actually decrease the pressure, decrease the movement until I place them into the stop where I want them to stop. Okay, moving from Australia where it's nice and hot over to Europe where it's nice and cold. It's winter over there. Some horses are not allowed to be turned out during the winter months. I've got a question from Carla from Germany. Do you ever allow horses to blow off steam on the lunge line, or should all work be with us should be controlled and balanced? She's got an arena where she could technically let him go free, but she's afraid that he might jump the door. And he's not allowed out to play. Yeah, so it's an interesting one.
Any horse that's like that, Carla, like if they've been cooped up a lot, if a horse is going to jump a rail or jump a fence, there's more than steam they're letting out. They're not just having a play and a kick and a buck and, letting themselves loose. They're actually, I reckon if they're going to jump a rail, they're running in fear and letting out a lot of anxiety. So if that's the horse you think you got, well, put a bigger fence up and let it off and just see, because I'm a big fan of sort of saying, let them go, see what we've got. So I've had this scenario at clinics when I've had a pretty quiet sort of horse. I'll go, and in your case, it's a cooped up horse, possibly in a winter stable, not getting out in the pasture as much and so forth, whatever the reason. But there also could be a lot of educational anxiety in there, and no matter how cooped up a horse is in the stable complex, they're still there with their mates, and they can still get anxious going to the arena and still want to go back to the stable, back to the dungeon. They'd be happier in the dungeon with their mates than being out maybe worked or something like that. Some of those horses, some are happy to get out and then they run around happy and excited. But if they're going to jump a fence, they're not just kind of running around. So basically, I don't want to say let it off and it jumps a fence, but I'm an experimenter. I put a horse in the yard and say, well, let's experiment. What happens when I let it off? Does it completely lose connection with me? Does it hang on the gate? Does it pace up and down the fence? Because you might have a pattern where it just kind of, and it actually disconnects without the lead on, and you learn a lot from that, and you realise that when you don't have that emotional hobble on it, then actually the horse is quite unsafe and disconnected. So imagine if you fell off the horse and you let go of the reins or the bridle came off or something, well, that scenario is going to repeat itself, because as soon as that idea that I'm connected through the reins or the rope on my head is gone, the horse disconnects and leaves. Okay, and that disconnection, if that disconnection is really strong and it runs around, well, that's kind of sitting underneath you or with you when you're leading it around. So usually when a horse is okay, you let them off, they might run around, but it's kind of soft and they're not kind of really intense and just trying to, force themselves against the fences and stuff. So
especially if there's no pressure, so she could do something like sit down in the middle of the arena, and that would that actually help with getting the horse to be interested in her? It would be an interesting liberty exercise.
The biggest thing what I do is just, if you can afford to maybe bolster the gate, make it a bit taller, is just sit down and go somewhere else. But watch out sitting down, because I've seen horses run past people and kick, and it's quite dangerous.
Right, okay.
There is, but standing up, they're going to do it. I've seen horses that get quite close when they gallop around, especially horses being round penned and been taught to hook onto someone, then someone lets them off in a paddock and they burl and they come galloping towards a person, but they know they're not in that. Some interesting scenarios, but basically, take all the pressure off the horse and just see what it does without pressure on it. And if that environment is making it pace the fence and just look out that gate and almost look like it wants to jump it, you know that there's work needs to be done, and you have to do it. You have to work on maybe a bit more connection to the feel, getting it to let go of strong thoughts, try other things at liberty. So if I've got a horse that gets out of control at liberty, then I need to sort of work it at liberty to get it to search better, make better decisions and stuff like that, and then balance that with in-hand work. The other thing you can do in your in-hand work is put it on longer ropes all the time. So if you're a little bit too worried about letting it off so it jumps the gate, just give it like this freedom on a long rope. So I get a really long lunge line and I'll lead them, and then if they trot past me, I'll just let them all the way out, and then I'll catch them on the end of the rope and walk back and just let them have the whole play of the rope, as long as they don't run through the rope at its full length. But you've got to be really good at picking up the rope and not letting them step all over it and get tangled in it. But they'll kind of blow out and run off, and you'll catch them and bring them back until they're sort of soft and they know where the rope is, and they're just trotting out and coming back, and almost like they're knowing where the fence is, but they know where the end of the rope is. And then maybe when they've blown off a little bit of steam on that long rope, and if you're starting to monitor if it's anxiety or just a healthy, I've been out of the stable and I want to run about a bit, then you might be able to take the risk of letting them off, opposed to just sort of taking them in and letting them off cold and going pop. So maybe try them on the long line and just do it for a while, that they feel like they've got a reasonable amount of freedom, and you've also walked all around the arena, and sometimes you've actually sent them out and let the fence catch them, but you've still got a little bit of rope left, if that makes sense. And just so you've just tested them out and try that. Some people say, get them to hook on or get them to really connect with you so they don't do it, but some horses that want to get away and want to think away, if you get them thinking on you, all you've done is refocused their focus. I want to see what they do when they think away, not just think them towards us to avoid them thinking away. So you've got to be careful that you don't get them, if they want to think away all the time, you don't get them to hook on too much, and otherwise when they do break free, they will still break free.
It's all about that balance again, isn't it? Getting them to look away and look towards us. It's about both. There is a section on Liberty, Carla, on the online membership. So that might interest you if you're going to do that. And good luck. I'd like to see a video of what your horse does if you do decide to let him off. And if you keep him on the rope, it's not about a lunging lesson. It's quite an erratic process. Let him just go.
Yeah, they'll feel a bit lost. But that's important. That's when they're a bit lost. That's when you see the truth.
There you go. Yeah, keep us posted on that one. Thank you so much, Nat and Em and Carla, for all those questions. And thanks, Mark, for your answers. We'll be here for more questions from our online members next week. Hope you join us then.
Thank you, Jay, and thank you, everybody.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please like it, share it, or send us a comment. It all helps in reaching new ears and helping more horses. And if making a change in your horse appeals to you, Mark offers his direct support and a diverse learning platform. Head to marklangley.com.au and grab your 7-day free trial.